She was given as punishment to a widowed mountain man, but one touch changed their lives forever. The wind howled through the mountain valley as the townspeople gathered, their eyes fixed on the trembling young woman standing before them. Her name was Clara Mayfield, a girl of barely 20 summers whose defiance had finally caught up with her. She wasn't wicked, just headstrong, too brave for a world that demanded silence from women. When she spoke out against the town's corrupt mayor, accusing him of cheating the orphans out of their land, the men called her a liar. When she refused to bow, they called her a sinner. And when she refused to apologize, they gave her to the only man in town everyone feared, the widowed mountain man. Elias Kane. The punishment was cruel. Elias lived high in the wilderness, away from civilization, known for his coldness, his solitude, and his violence when angered. They said his wife had died in childbirth years ago, and that since then he'd spoken to no one. Giving Clara to him was meant to teach her obedience, to make her suffer in silence. The crowd whispered as the sheriff read the sentence aloud, his voice echoing in the cold air. You will serve Elias Kane until he sees fit to release you. Your disobedience will be your burden to bear. Clara's heart pounded, but her chin stayed high. You can take away my freedom, she said, her voice shaking. But you will never take my spirit, the sheriff sneered. We'll see about that. The next morning, she was led up the mountain trail by an older man who pitied her. As they approached the wooden cabin nestled among towering pines, Clara saw him, Elias Kane. He stood shirtless in the morning sun, his body marked with scars of hard labor, his beard thick and wild. His piercing blue eyes met hers, not with lust or anger, but with something far deeper, pain. The man who was supposed to be her punishment looked at her as if she were a ghost. Leave her, Elias said gruffly to the escort. If the town wants to throw away another soul, I'll take her. The man nodded, touched Clara's shoulder one last time, and left. Silence hung in the air as Elias turned and walked back toward the cabin. You can stay if you work, he muttered. If you don't, you can starve. His tone was cold, but there was a weariness beneath it. Days turned into weeks. Clara did her chores, fetched water from the stream, and tried to stay out of his way. Yet every time she looked at him, working the woodpile, repairing the roof, tending the horses, something stirred inside her. He wasn't cruel, only broken. One evening, a storm rolled in, and Clara rushed outside to save the laundry, hanging in the rain. Lightning split the sky, and a branch fell near her, knocking her to the ground. Elias was there in an instant, his strong arms lifting her to safety. For a moment their eyes locked, his hand brushing her cheek, her breath trembling as warmth surged through her body. You're bleeding, he said, his voice softer than she'd ever heard it. It's nothing, she whispered, though her heart was racing. His thumb lingered on her skin for just a second longer, and in that instant something changed. The punishment, the pain, the loneliness, all of it faded. In his touch she felt safety. In her eyes he saw forgiveness. Neither spoke of it, but from that night on, the cabin didn't feel so empty anymore. And for the first time in years, Elias dreamed, not of loss, but of hope. The mountains were quiet after the storm, washed clean by the rain. The world smelled of pine and earth, and for Clara and Elias, life slowly began to find rhythm again. She cooked breakfast each morning, while he worked the land in silence. But something had shifted, unspoken, undeniable. When their hands brushed at the table, or their eyes met across the firelight, both felt it. It wasn't supposed to happen. She was his punishment. He was her captor. Yet the heart does not bow to rules made by men. One morning, Clara found him sitting by the creek, staring at a small wooden cross buried near the water. She approached quietly and saw a woman's name carved into it, Sarah Kane, his late wife. Her chest tightened. I'm sorry, she said softly. She must have been someone special. Elias didn't look up. She was my world, he said, his voice low, and I lost her because I couldn't save her. His hands were trembling. After that, I stopped trying to save anyone. Clara knelt beside him. Maybe she sent me here, she whispered. Maybe you're not being punished. Maybe you're being given another chance to live. His eyes turned to her then, searching her face for deceit but found none. The walls he'd built for years began to crack. That night, as the fire burned low, Clara sat near the hearth, her hair falling loose around her shoulders. Elias watched her in silence, torn between guilt and desire. "You should have never been brought here," he said finally. "They wanted to break you." She looked up at him, her eyes shimmering. "Maybe they did," she said. "But you're the reason I'm standing again." He moved closer, his breath warm against her skin. For a moment, time stood still. His rough hand touched her cheek, the same touch that had once been cold and distant was now trembling, tender, alive. She leaned into it, and in that touch, years of pain dissolved. The widowed mountain man who had shut his heart away felt it open, like sunlight breaking through the clouds. "Clara," he whispered, "I don't deserve this." She smiled through tears. "Maybe we both do." The days that followed were filled with laughter, small and rare but real. Together they rebuilt the fence, planted new crops, and began to carve a life out of the wilderness. The man who had lived in shadows now walked beside her, his heart lighter with every sunrise. When word reached town that Clara's punishment had turned into love, the same people who had judged her came to see the truth for themselves. And when they arrived, they found not a broken girl and a beastly man, but two souls reborn. Elias faced them with pride, his arm around Clara. "You called her punishment," he said, "but she became my salvation." The townsfolk left speechless, and from that day forward, no one dared speak against them again. On quiet evenings, as the sun sank behind the peaks, Elias would take her hand, and they'd sit together watching the light fade, knowing that fate's cruel twist had become their greatest blessing. He had lost everything once, but in her he found everything again, and though neither said it aloud, both knew one touch had truly changed their lives forever.